Hello, and welcome back to Special Ed and Special Ed. Thank you for joining me. I'm excited about today's guest. I have Andrea Pollack with us. Andrea's journey is both inspiring and unique. After a successful 19-year career as a litigator, she shifted gears dramatically to focus on something deeply personal, supporting parents of autistic children through the challenges of education and parenting. This shift was sparked by her own experiences homeschooling her autistic son when no suitable educational setting could be found, leading her to not only earn a master's degree in education, but also to found Autism Parent Solutions. This is where she offers a lifeline to parents, empowering them with strategies and support to help their autistic children thrive. Additionally, as chairman of the board of the Cook School, an institute in New York City, she continues to impact special education significantly. Today, Andrea is here to share her invaluable insights into specialized education, the transformative power of mindset shifts for parents, and navigating the complexities of raising a child on the autism spectrum. So thank you, Andrea, for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Good. So before we get into it, I'm going to play my disclaimer as I always do. So let's get that out of the way.
The information in this podcast is provided for general informational and entertainment purposes only and may not reflect the current law in your jurisdiction at the time you're listening. Nothing in this episode creates an attorney-client relationship, nor is it legal advice. Do not act or refrain from acting on the basis of any information included in or accessible through this episode without seeking appropriate legal or other professional advice on the particular facts and circumstances at issue from a lawyer or service provider licensed in your state, country, or other appropriate licensing jurisdiction.
Andrea, I'm so glad you're here, and I would love to start off by understanding your journey. What brought you here? Talk a little bit about raising your son and some of the challenges you experienced and why you're the person I am talking to about parenting autistic children.
Sure. Initially, after his diagnosis, we helped to create a school with other parents in New York City, and he's now 25. So that was 22 years ago.
Wow.
And the school experience just wasn't working well for him. The model didn't work for him. It was a great school. It worked for other children. It wasn't good for him. So I decided to leave my career, as you mentioned, and homeschool him. I had no idea what I was doing. I also didn't know when I started that I was going to be doing that for 8 years.
Oh, wow. Had
I known that, I don't know, I might have been too intimidated. So we started to homeschool him, and I tried to learn everything I could, everything that was available. I read all the books and I did the Google searches. Although, 22 years ago, there was a lot less available than there is today.
Yes.
Which is, it's better that there's more in some ways, but I know that that's also overwhelming.
It's good and bad, right?
Yes.
Because I always tell parents, take everything with a grain of salt and do your research. Make sure, just because that happened for one parent doesn't mean it's happening for you. So,
Exactly. So after 8 years, he was ready to return to a school setting. And I decided that it really would be wrong for me to go back to law, that it would be criminal for me to not take what I had learned and share it with other parents. So I, at that point, went back to school and got my master's in education to become the most effective teacher and coach that I could be. And I started Autism Parent Solutions so that I could help other parents, because what I knew after all of those years was that I had learned so much through trial and error, and that I could spare parents a lot of trial and error. I could help them get to a place of parenting confidence so much sooner, and I could help them sort through the overwhelm to achieve that confidence sooner.
That's wonderful. And you're right. I think there is a lot of trial and error. And 22 years ago, I had a friend who was in the same situation exactly and did what basically, created a new school here in Connecticut just so that her child could be properly serviced, because it just didn't exist back then. And 22 years ago, we as attorneys were still arguing ABA as, we're still getting the methodology argument, right? ABA is a method, not that we don't have to follow. We were not in a place where it was well known and agreed to. So it was very challenging back then for a lot of reasons. So I want to talk a little bit about, I know you've had your child both homeschooled, but the homeschooling, it wasn't like you at your kitchen table, right? He was engaging in a program that was created specifically for his needs. And then in the public school, students have IEPs and the individual education plans. And I'd like for you to talk just a little bit about what those are. They're individualized for the student, but how, when you're coaching parents, and I know you don't do a lot on the component of the legal aspect, because that's not the area that you're focusing on, but with IEPs, how do you coach your parents?
Well, the advice I give on that, so the IEPs, of course, set out the annual goals for the child. And schools are a place where a lot of the goals are academic, as they should be. That's a really interesting and important thing. But so much of what our children need help with is on the behavioral side. And by behavioral, I don't mean like challenging behavior. I mean, they need help with impulse control, and they need help with frustration tolerance and help with flexibility. So those underlying skills are so important to enabling the academic success be more effective. So I do encourage parents to ensure that on the IEP, we're not just talking about how many words they're going to read or what school level or how much math, that we're also addressing those foundational skills.
I'm so glad you said that, because that is exactly what the IEP is meant to address. And that's why the IDEA is there, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is special ed. That's what governs special ed. School is not just academics. Education is not just academics. We include behavioral, emotional, and foundational skills. So if there's a child who's struggling in any of those areas, they should absolutely 100% have an IEP with those goals and objectives on them. And I know that for, at least in Connecticut, it's, I think, 14 that we start talking about transition goals. And you can start those so much earlier, right? Because, if you wait till a child's 16, say, to start working on something that is ultimately like a communication skills that are ultimately going to be needed for post-high school life, you're waiting too long. So, and I think, we refer to those as the foundational skills, I think, initially, rather than the transitional skills. But right. To think about, for parents to think about, what are the skills that this child or that your child is going to need post high school, whether that's post 12th grade or post 22, the age of 22, to understand what are those skills they're going to need and how can we start building them from the beginning.
Yes. The other thing I will say on the IEP front, and I'm sure we'll get into this a lot more because it's a lot of what I do in coaching, is to make sure that in addition to making sure that the building of those skills is on the IEP, to also make sure that it's not done in a disciplinary punishment type way. Mm-hmm. Because this is the development of social emotional skills. It needs to be done in a way that's compatible with building self-esteem, right? The child's always being criticized because they can't control their impulses and all those things. These are skills that they need to learn, and they need to be learned in a positive environment for them. So that's another thing that is important to me for parents to know, to advocate on for IEPs.
I completely agree. And I think when we're talking about programs for autistic children and we're talking about behavioral issues, it's about not reacting to the behavior, but rather finding out what the core issue is of the behavior and then building skills from there. So as you said, if a child is having meltdowns, that's a way they are communicating to you. They're communicating something. What is it? Is it, I can't control myself, I don't have any self-restraint, self-control, or is it I'm upset or uncomfortable or whatever it is? And even for verbal children, I'm not just talking about nonverbal children. And candidly, typically developing children too, the things we think of as behaviors are an inability to communicate something to us. And we need to find out what that is.
Right. And sometimes the problem is that the expectation is too high for that child. So sometimes it's not even, the core problem isn't at the child level, it's at the expectation level. So we need to meet them where they are so that they can be successful and help them build from there in small increments.
That's a great point. And from the legal perspective, for me, when I get to, sometimes I see IEPs that are just dumbed down and it's not mindfully done the way you're talking about. Like if it's too much, this is not what this child can accomplish in 1 year. And we're starting way ahead of where they are. You do need to meet them where they are, but parents need to be wary as well of sometimes school districts, if they aren't meeting the goals and objectives because of other reasons, they may what I call dumb them down. So you have to make sure that we're not dumbing it down. We're just meeting the child where they are. And that always starts with evaluations. Everything we do in the IEP starts with an evaluation.
What I always say to parents about that is that high level of expectation, your child can get there, but they can't get there through shame and punishment. They need to be met where they are and then built up to that. But there's no reason why they can't build it it just needs to start in the right place.
Exactly. And high expectations are good. I want parents to have high expectations and hold their school district to a high level. So that's absolutely right. But as you said, it might take time. You might have to start where they are, not where you would like them to be. And it might not happen in 1 year. Some students need, and that's why I'm saying, when we talk about transition services, which we're really not talking about today, but they kind of play in to those foundational pieces, that you can start on some of those things earlier. I like the example of, for a child to be independent on their own later in life, they pretty much need to be toilet trained. We don't wait till they're 14 or 15 or 16 to start toilet training them. That's not how that works. So, there's some skills we can address much earlier on, which I think is great. And thinking of the IEPs, do you coach your parents in advocating in the school? I mean, as an advocate, as a non-attorney advocate, because I know that you're not practicing in this area of the law. So as a non-attorney advocate, how do you coach your parents on how to understand students' rights and how to advocate for their child?
Well, what we focus on is really being an equal partner with the school, which is what they're entitled to be under the IDEA, right?
Despite the fact that there are 20 other people at the table with you, you are equal partners.
Right. But, and we talk about what that means and how to advocate. And, we talk about the importance of being an informed, active participant, but also really, being kind and open-minded, right? Because sometimes parents are inclined to go in there with all their, fists up and ready. And that's not the most helpful way to be an equal partner. But also, it's really important to be persistent if your child's not getting what they need. And that's why the whole program is really geared toward confident parenting. And that's an element of it, to be able to have that confidence to go in and be an equal partner with the school.
That's a great point. I always encourage parents to learn as much as they can, but you can't learn everything by just reading the law. It's much more nuanced behind the scenes, but you do have to have a basic understanding of your rights. And you have to, as you said, going in with guns blazing is rarely productive. I mean, no matter how upset you are, it's rarely productive. And I find that most of the time, it's not the actual people working with the child that are restricting what they're able to do. They have orders from up above saying either do this, don't do that, don't recommend this. I know I have clients all the time say the teacher came to me and said they're not going to say this in the IEP, but I should ask for blank. And a lot of times that's good. If you have a good relationship with the staff working with your child, they are going to give you information that they may not feel they are able to, even though they're supposed to, throwing that out there, but that sometimes they feel they're not able to do formally. So I always think that that's really important. I also like to point out that yelling at the school district when you disagree, again, rarely productive, but there are methods to resolve issues. And there is mediation if you disagree with something that they're asking for. There are resolution sessions. A lot of schools will do that, what they call voluntary resolution sessions, and meaning that you're not filing for due process or anything, but you're agreeing to have a separate meeting to discuss, what the issues are. And there's always that right for individual educational evaluations. So IEEs, if you don't agree with the evaluation, ask for an IEE and get another one and do that. I mean, always, you can also consult with people, but I like to throw that in there, that there are other methods than trying to convince the staff in an IEP meeting what to do and what to provide. There are other methods that they have.
Right. One thing I'll add on the IEP front that I help parents embrace, sometimes they don't want to hear some of the challenges their child is having. So they are actually against the support that the child needs. And I help them understand that this isn't, any kind of long-term projection. This is just what your child needs right now. So don't resist it. Right. So sometimes it goes the other way. Like, we're talking about parents advocating for more help if their child isn't getting it. But I also want to make sure parents know to not advocate for less help, because they don't want to face the fact that their child has those needs.
And I do run into that a lot as well. In those situations, I often recommend getting an IEE, because I feel like when you get somebody from the outside who probably has more experience and credentials than the evaluator in your school, and they provide and say, this is what this child needs, and this is what it will look like, and this is where they can get to. I feel like breaking it down into those smaller pieces sometimes helps parents understand. because you don't get that kind of breakdown usually in a school evaluation. And I find that outside evaluators are better at breaking it down. This is what it looks like now. This is where they can go. And this is about what it's going to take to get there. So I think that's really helpful. I hear a lot too, like, I don't want my child labeled. Do you get that?
Yes. Interestingly, there's a lot of compelling research that shows that a lot of times, and this goes to whether or not you tell that your child what their diagnosis is, and parents don't want the child to know because they don't want them to feel othered. And I understand that completely, but the research does show that individuals who, are able to then understand what's going on are relieved by it. They're like, oh, that makes so much sense now. My whole life makes sense.
Right.
I guess the idea is if the label doesn't mean anything negative, it doesn't have to, right?
No.
And so if we don't allow that label to mean that negative thing. If it doesn't mean the negative thing, then there's no harm in labeling the child.
Right. And I think that from my perspective, if you're looking for services for a child who's autistic, you need to be identifying them as autistic. You're not going to get those services that you require under, ADHD, right? So you're not going to, it's going to just have a different focus. Obviously, all IEPs are supposed to be tailored to the child, but you might have a different focus in that situation, which you might not want to dive into. Oh, and that's the other thing I have. Will this follow them for the rest of their life? Is that document in their educational record? Sure. Is every future teacher going to read it? Probably not. I don't know of many teachers who read beyond what they need to know that year. Occasionally, they might read the previous evaluation, but really they're focused on what they have to do that year. So I tell parents not to get so caught up with that because it's not like it's following them. And again, as you said, it's not negative.
Right. There are plenty of very, very successful people. Yeah. Very successful people who are autistic. So it's not a long-term, problem. It's
right.
Just, let's focus on now. That's a big part of what I help parents with also, because I understand it. Look, I was the same. I was worried about what the future would look like. But if we can stay as focused as possible on the now and get the help your child needs now, it increases the odds of a successful future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So to that, and when you're parenting coach, right? So you're helping parents learn how to parent their autistic child. So I want to talk a little bit about why conventional parenting isn't, and I say that as if we all parent the same way, which we don't, we know it, but there are some common themes in traditional parenting that are counterintuitive for a child with autism. So can you talk a little bit to that?
Sure. So many of us are programmed by our culture, our background, our upbringing, to shape behavior through discipline techniques. It's the way we were brought up. It's the way teachers behaved in our schools. And we're not even aware of it. It's a programming that's in there that we're not aware that we're repeating. So we use things like threats and punishments and even rewards, which can be really tricky because if the boundary is not in the right place, incentivizing a child with a reward is never going to enable them to meet it. It stresses them out because they know they can't meet it because they don't have the skill, right?
Right.
So using those kinds of techniques, in my opinion, target the wrong problem.
And children can be inconsistent. So
that's true too.
If they get that reward once, doesn't mean they'll get it again. And, I think that we are programmed to say, oh, well, look, they did it once, so they can do it, right? So they can do it based on this strategy because they did it once. That's not really how it works.
It's not true for any of us. As I say to the parents, right, I work with, I say, they ever come home from work and been like, I just can't cook. I just can't make dinner. Either we're eating pizza or we're eating Cheerios,
right?
But I'm spent. Okay. But you could make dinner yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Exactly. So fair. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think especially when children have boundaries to their ability to perform, that it makes it a million times different. And I think I love that you focus on the positive component. And as we've already said, I always look at it as the child is communicating something to you, right? If they are having a negative, what we would call behavior, and I'm using my air quotes that no one can see, that they're communicating something. And that's for typically developing children too, I find, they are communicating something to you. And as the parent, it is your job to figure out what they are communicating to you.
Exactly. They're communicating, in my opinion, an undeveloped skill or an unmet need, right? And that's why these techniques like punishments and threats and rewards, they target the wrong problem because they're targeting the child's desire to behave. Like if you behave well, you get this thing.
Right.
But if it's a skill deficit, it's targeting the wrong problem. So the perspective I first share to try to help parents embrace this is that your child is not choosing that behavior in the moment.
Right.
If they could do better in the moment, they would. Okay.
And I think that's just a natural thing with children. They want to please. As a rule, children want to please and they want to do well. And if they're not, it's not because they've decided, I'm going to give you a bad day.
Right.
You know?
Right. I mean, does it mean that they never choose that behavior? Of course not. Right. Sometimes there are behaviors that they're infuriating. They need to be addressed, but we can do so in a different way by helping them build the skills that are leading to that kind of behavior.
Exactly. It's not just that the behaviors aren't just coming from something. Sometimes the behaviors give them something they want. You know, maybe if they know that they'll be removed from something, then that behavior is going to occur, not because something happened before the behavior, but because they know they'll be removed from the environment and they don't want to be there. So I think it goes both ways. It's not just that there is a root cause to that behavior. It could be something that happened before the behavior. It could be something that happened after the behavior. So you have to look at both.
Well, even on that issue of escape, right, as a reason, I don't think that those children are calculating that.
Oh, no.
Not, right?
Yeah.
But we have to be careful because it makes it sound like they're choosing this behavior in order to achieve escape. And I think they're not choosing it at all. They're showing us that they've run out of the limit of their tolerance for whatever's happening. So they behave that way and there's no downside for them because they get
right. Exactly.
But they're still not choosing it, in my opinion.
Okay. Interesting. No, I think that's fair. And I think you're right, because if they don't want to be there, I'm just processing this in my head. If they don't want to be there or it's an uncomfortable environment for them, they're communicating to you that they don't want to be there. And, if you're trying to force them to sit still and be happy, that's not training them to get rid of the behavior because the behavior is actually getting them out of it. So again, they're not choosing that behavior, but they're not motivated for your star or your sticker.
Right. And what I would say is it's not that they don't want to be there, but it's something about it is very, very hard for them. And that's the thing we need to figure out. What is so hard so that we can make it easier to enable them to be successful in being there?
Yes. And then that raises the question, is that something they need to learn? Is that an environment they're going to have to encounter on a regular basis? Or is it something we've construed that they can choose not to be there? I know I have people I don't want to be around. Yeah. So sometimes I have to be, and I have to build my tolerance for that. But I think it's also, when there are when there are personality issues, and there can be for an autistic child, that it's fair to say they may not always want to go to this class or see that teacher. And yes, they have to build a tolerance and learn, as you said, to make it easier. But I think we also really need to look at how are we delivering this instruction as well. Maybe what we're doing isn't meeting the need.
Well, right, exactly. And when if a child really doesn't like to go to a particular class and be with a particular teacher, we have to look at, is the subject matter too far above what they can do to be successful? Because you don't want to go in every day and feel unsuccessful. That's not fair. Or is the teacher subtly communicating disapproval every day? And that's why. So we have to figure out what is the cause of that, because if it can be remedied, we can help the teacher use a more positive approach toward the student. If the subject matter is too hard, then absolutely, why should they be in a class that they can't succeed in?
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. And that goes back to what you said, starting where the child is. Mm-hmm. That's where we always, that's where the evaluations come in. You get the evaluation so that you know exactly where your child is and you work from there. It drives me crazy when, in the middle, maybe it's not their annual or triannual evaluation, but something is shifted with the child. So the IEP shifts and there's no evaluation because something is shifted and we don't know what it is. We need to evaluate in some way, shape, or form to identify why that suddenly popped up and why it suddenly happened. And for parents, you are entitled to ask for an evaluation at any point if it's needed and warranted. So just a little tip there. I want to talk about mindset shifts. Parents. I know that is a key component. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of the mindset shifts?
Absolutely. I mean, it does start with the idea that the child's not choosing the behavior. And the reason that's so important is not only because it then helps us figure out what skills are missing and how to build them, but it helps to keep the parent regulated, which is so important. Because if you think your child is doing that on purpose, whatever that is, it's hard not to get upset, angry, scared, all of those things. Whereas if we just look at it objectively as, okay, the child's not choosing it, what skill is missing here, or what support do they need that's not in place, it's easier to stay regulated. And that's so important because one dysregulated person, meaning the parent, can't help regulate a child, right? So we're adding fuel to the fire in that case. Another that I did already mention as well is the idea of staying present, right? If we stay present and focus on the current needs, it doesn't mean we're never going to think of the future, but we can't let, some, undetermined future dictate what you do now. Your best odds of success in the future are helping the child with exactly what they need right now.
And I always say having an end goal like that unknown future, undetermined future is great, because if you have a path, you can deviate from the path, right? You can make changes. If you don't have that path, then you don't know where you're going. But as you said, that doesn't mean we're addressing those higher level pieces today. Today, we're addressing what does this child need to function with me in the grocery store, or be able to transition from school to home, or whatever those pieces are. That's what the child really requires. And I think that's one of the reasons it's so important for parents to really understand their rights with a school district, because I hear a lot, well, they told us that was a home issue. They told us that was our problem. Or sometimes evaluations will actually say school, home, other, and it's like they're designating where things should go. And the reality is a lot of that can and should be addressed in school.
Right. It's all integrated.
Yes.
So a school example of this would be, an example that I helped a family with. The child had difficulty attending school, and it got so bad that basically he was threatening to throw himself out of a moving car on the way to school. Like, it was just so bad, right? And then it was treated with discipline. Now you have to go to school, right? And it was never going to support him in the way he needed.
Right.
So it became like this negative spiral. So instead, what we did was we looked for what was the source of the problem. Why was it so hard for him to go to school? And there were a number of different elements. He worried about what his teachers thought in certain instances. He didn't find a friend group so easily. There's a lot of issues. And we worked with the school to address issue by issue to try to help him, and then allowed him to go to school for a shortened period. And some days he couldn't go in the beginning. But the idea was we were building up. And now he fully attends school. He's fully happy. He's doing great.
And that goes back to what you said before, which is finding the root cause. Why is it difficult? Because something's going on. There's a barrier there.
Right. And it's not just that he didn't want to go to school. That's what I mean.
Right.
Like, the perspective shift is he's not choosing this. There's a real reason here why this is hard. Let's find out what it is and help fix it. That's our only chance of success here.
Right. It's either
you can beat him into it. Like, how's that going to work?
Exactly. So we're talking about like a skill deficit or an unmet need, right?
Exactly.
So if you can ask yourself, what is a skill that doesn't exist, or the unmet need? And for some students, that's harder to identify than others.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you do need, well, the other pieces that I think is really important for parents to understand is that if the school is doing something that is successful and they're saying, well, home is different, parents can request parent training. That's absolutely a related service. So if your child is only melting down at home and not at school, you can absolutely ask for that in the IEP. And I'm sure that's something that you help address as well. But I think parents feel like, oh, it's home, so it's like an island. And it really shouldn't be.
Yes. Although one of the things I will say that parents need to be careful about with that kind of parent training is that it has to be targeted to parenting, right? It's not an extension of the school or the teacher's agenda.
Right.
And children do behave differently in school than they do at home. And sometimes children use up all their patience at school. So they come home and they melt down. Like, there are a lot of differences between the environment, the function of school versus the function of home, right? In school, they are working on, largely on building academic skill for the future. At home, they're working on, the whole child, right? The well-being of the whole child. So I just think parents need to be aware of that because sometimes I find that parent training is not designed to really support parenting.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And that's why they can come to the home. I mean, I think for that person to have the parents come into the school to understand the behavior plan or whatever it is, that's not realistic. As you said, I think it's important for the BCBA, which is a board certified behavior analyst which typically gets involved in their behaviors that we have with students, or the school psychologist, or whoever is implementing, or the special education teacher, whoever is appropriate, to go home and look at that environment and say, okay, this is how it's different. These are the pieces that are important in this environment versus our environment. And yes, it's all in an effort for the child to achieve their IEP goals and objectives. That doesn't mean the parent is teaching the IEP goals and objectives. That means that the parent is integrating the responses the school has into their parenting so that it's consistent, not that they're running a program. Right. So them teaching you how to get your child to sit at the dinner table might be what they need as consistency for implementing their program during the school day. So as you said, it really has to be an integrated, it has to be integrated into their parenting philosophy.
Right. Yeah, I just want to add one quick mindset shift that I hadn't mentioned yet that I think is so important. And that is, it's really important to celebrate wins, even the smallest wins.
Yeah.
Because we are so focused on our children's needs and our children's challenges and all of those things. And that's great because that helps us problem solve and get their needs met. Mm-hmm. But there are wins that happen every day if you look for them. And it's really important to celebrate them, both for yourself and for the child. It relates to the child's development of self-esteem, and it relates to the parents' building of confidence and hope. So it's really important.
100%. I had a child who was engaging in not so safe online behavior, and the parent came to us with the sheets, and I said, well, yes, this is dangerous, but on another note, the writing has really improved, because it was sort of like fan fiction kind of thing. And I was like, so let's focus. There's one thing that we learned out of it that was good. It was sort of a weird way to get there, but I'm like, their writing's improved greatly. So for parents who struggle with getting to that shift, because I do think sometimes parents take it personally. Sometimes the child is mean to them, and they don't really take it I shouldn't say mean to them. Again, it's not willful, but something happens and they interpret it as the child is being mean to me, or I can't parent this child. And that I think often that's probably more prevalent, but it's that attitude that children should behave because you told them to. And it's hard to shift out of that and turn to, it's not me being a bad parent. It's the student having a need, or the child having a need that maybe your other children didn't have, So how do you help parents make that shift? Because that's a hard shift.
Right. Well, if you go back to they're not choosing the behavior, that there's a skill deficit or an unmet need. And really, I mean, that's an easy shift to understand on its face, but to maintain can be a little bit more challenging.
Yeah.
What I try to help parents do is I want them to experience all their feelings. I want them to process all their feelings. I don't want them to stuff their feelings down, but they can understand that in the moment, they can set their feelings aside, do the best they can to help their child in the moment, because their child is showing you they're in distress.
Right.
So you going into distress doesn't help. So by focusing on they're not choosing the behavior, let me address the situation here, and then I can go cry in my bedroom later. Right?
Yeah, no, I totally get it. That's why I'm laughing at it. Yep. Cry in your bedroom later, go sit in the closet by yourself.
Right. Call a friend, whatever, go on, whatever it is, however it is that you help yourself through it. Once you see enough times that the child isn't choosing the behavior and really believe it, you can see that as, okay, we have some work to do here.
Mm-hmm.
And also the parent is developing a closer bond all the time in that way with the child, so that they can say later, I want to talk about my feelings. Not in the moment though. The child doesn't have access. I always say they don't have access to the smart part of their brain. So we can't reason with them
right
in that, highly charged moment.
Well, and they're going to mirror the parent's behavior. Parents say, well, it escalated. 9 times out of 10, that's because the parent was escalating too. And we don't always see our own behaviors and emotions the way that other people see them. So if you're escalating and becoming more frustrated, the child's going to mimic that and come up here. And everybody is losing access to the smart part of their brain.
Right. And sometimes parents will say, well, I'm entitled to feel that way. Absolutely.
100%.
You're 100% entitled to. It makes perfect sense. Most people in your shoes would, but in the moment, what's the most effective thing I can do?
Mm-hmm.
I try as hard as I can. And it's not that easy. I'm not oversimplifying this, but to put my feelings about this to the side, to recognize that I need to self-regulate first, and then I'll deal with my feelings thereafter, because in the moment, it's just not helpful.
Exactly. And it's not easy. Like, just to be fair, it's really not easy to be able to stay calm sometimes.
You know what else? Here's another thing I tell parents all the time that I think is so important. Confident parenting, great parenting isn't perfect parenting. It's okay. We're not going to break them. If we have a moment where we lose control of our self-regulation and we cause the escalation, okay, get up, dust yourself off. Let's go into tomorrow, right? It's going to happen. And that's okay. Our children will see us as people. They know we have feelings. So this is not about being perfect.
And I think also it opens that opportunity for you to talk to your child about, I made a mistake, or my reaction was disproportionate to the situation.
Yes.
And I acknowledge that. And it's difficult for me in that situation to maintain myself. So, I'm going to try and do better next time. And that really, I think, can also help children understand that it's okay to not do it perfectly all the time.
Yes. I mean, you're modeling what that looks like, right? We're always modeling for our children. So you're humanizing yourself, and you're modeling what, self-reflection looks like. You're modeling what an apology looks like. It's brilliant. And kids love it when parents apologize to them.
Oh, yeah. A little too much. No. So to that point, difficulty, it is difficult. Parenting is hard, period. Doesn't matter what kids you have. Parenting is hard. Now you have a child who requires completely different parenting than what you are used to, and it may or may not be successful. And you're engaging these challenges often with your school district, because I always say, even if every school district did what they were supposed to and every parent did what they were supposed to, I'd still have a job, because they're just disagreements sometimes. Sometimes they're just disagreements. And, there's more than one way to skin a cat. That's a weird saying now that I said that, but I don't know why we'd be doing that in the first place. But anyway, I digress. So for parents, how did they build that network? I was at a conference early in my legal career that a mother said something that was really stuck with me. And that was, I couldn't hang out with my friends who were super worried about their child not doing well in calculus because we were still potty training. And, and when we had these small wins, like, woohoo, they didn't eat the coaster on the table, the other parents couldn't be supportive. They were sad, and so there is sometimes, and that doesn't mean all parents of typical children are like that. Some totally get it, and they can jump on board, and they know when not to be a lunatic in front of you.
Well, actually, one of the things I found that's so interesting is that it's impossible to know the right thing to say to each person, because sometimes somebody says to you, like, well, everybody has issues. You think like you're being dismissed, like it's very dismissive, and you feel insulted. Like, whether you can hangnail is not the same as whether my child's still being potty trained at 16. There's that. But on the flip side, if someone says, oh, poor you, oh, you're doing such a good job, I could never do. Some people feel like, don't pity me. I don't need to be pitied. Right. So in a weird way, we're setting other people up, though, to really have nothing right to say. It's very, very difficult.
Yes. And that is, I totally hear what you're saying, because that drives me crazy and I know it's well-intentioned. You're a special person to be able to do this, or the one I really hate is God only gives us what we can handle. And I'm like, I cannot take that one. I'm like, really? He's got a great sense of humor. Thank you. So anyway, I think you're right. And so how do parents build those networks and support systems? And again, that doesn't mean you're losing all your friends that you had before. I don't mean it that way, but you do have to build a support system that understands you where you are. So it's not just about meeting the child where they are, but the parent needs to be met where they are as well. So how do you go about doing that?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I have an answer for you other than, that's why my program has a group component to it. And parents love that, right? We get together twice per week and we celebrate wins first because it is so important, right? The happiness research shows that the amount of time you spend focused on positive things versus negative things really makes a difference. And then we dig into all of the what's going on and people can see, oh, the themes are the same. We're having the same kinds of issues. Sometimes a parent will recommend something to another parent, and that's always lovely. So, I think you have to just find your tribe. And it's hard to say because there are online groups and some of them are so toxic that's not a place either. So, in my experience, I found like two friends when I was raising my son who we could really talk about this stuff. And that's what I guess I would say in part, keep your friends and go to book clubs, do whatever you can do if you can. I mean, it's hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, right?
Right.
But you don't have to talk about these issues there, right? Separate out and save these issues for certain people who are the ones who are privileged to be in conversation with you about that.
Yes, that's great advice. And I do think the online piece is a blessing and a curse at the same time. And I always tell parents there are two things to keep in mind. If you've got some Facebook group of parents with exactly the same child and you don't feel good when you get off of it, leave it.
Yes.
You should be feeling positive when you are scrolling through that page. And if you don't, get the heck out. And the other piece is take everything with a grain of salt. Because just because one parent got a certain outcome doesn't mean you're going to have that same outcome. So it's good information to have always. But the other piece is, especially when it comes to dealing with your school district, I've seen that sometimes parents don't understand the process, even though they've been through part of it. So I've had people say that they won something in due process when really it was a mediation or something along those lines. So it's really important for parents who are seeking advice to recognize that there could be really key components that are missing that, you don't know about. Right. And so it's critical that you take everything with a grain of salt and do your own research.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the transformative role of a parenting coach. Let's talk about what that looks like.
My role as a parenting coach, there's clearly an education component to what I do to help parents. I try to curate what I believe are the best focused, practical parenting guidance, because you could read books from now till the end of your life and not get through everything.
Exactly.
So I tried to curate what, in my opinion, is the best advice. I think it's pretty straightforward and good. But then having that forum for parents to meet in a small group where they can get the kind of coaching. And here's why. Another reason I do it in a small group is not just because of the community element, which is very important. But what I'm teaching parents is the framework to figure out and understand how to problem solve, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm helping them in the moment solve the problem, right? I'm giving them answers, but I'm also backing out what is the process we use to figure out what that process is.
Right.
And when they hear it applied to other people's issues, sometimes it's easier to understand a process when it's not applied to you directly.
Yes. I mean, that's the same as we can't see our own emotions sometimes.
Right. Every meeting, we handle, 6, 7, 8 issues, and we go through the process each time. And it helps parents really have that framework sink in, because eventually what happens is they don't have to think about it as deeply every time. It just becomes how they parent. And that's the goal.
I think that's a great point. It's the repetition too, right? Because as we said, it's difficult to implement all your parenting skills in that one moment sometimes, but if you're practicing it outside of that moment, eventually it might seep in.
Exactly. Well, and then the important thing, and we covered this a little bit, it is about guidance on implementation, right? Because so much of what's out there is more information, and parents don't always need more information. What they need is help applying the information. Mm-hmm. And what I find is sometimes parents come to me and they've read so much, they've done workshops, they've done all the things, and it actually leads them to believe that nothing will ever work because those things haven't worked. They might have worked had they had the proper guidance in implementation. Say you try a strategy, it doesn't quite work. Then in my group, they have the opportunity to come back and I can say, okay, well, how do we do it? Where can we tweak it? Right? It doesn't mean that anybody did anything wrong.
Right.
It just means that that exact way didn't work. There are always ways to see opportunities to make small shifts until the implementation works.
I love that, because what you read in the book might be similar to what you're addressing or dealing with, but it might not be the same. And your child might not be the same as the child they're talking about in the book. So I always, well, I don't always say, people say it's a fair saying, if you've met one child with autism, you've met one child with autism, right? It doesn't mean, yes, there are some common threads, but it doesn't mean that you fully understand autism. I don't know that anybody fully does. So understanding that just because, as you said, it didn't work that time doesn't mean nothing is going to work.
Right. Well, parents, yes, they often come to me and say, I've tried everything and nothing works.
Right.
And I understand why they feel that way. I feel compassion for that, because they are trying so hard. They're so dedicated. They're so hardworking, but they haven't been given the tools that they need. They haven't been given the follow-up support. And it takes a lot of follow-up.
Mm-hmm. Especially since our brain isn't really programmed for that, right? That's not how we were parented for most people.
Right.
So,
right. And because the issues arise in those heated moments, like you said, it's about being able to have time and opportunity to self-reflect afterward when you do have access to the smart part of your brain, right?
yes.
To really think through what I could do differently next time without penalizing myself. Like sometimes parents, something goes wrong and they're like, I should have done this. I should have done. No, you did the best you could. And now let's take it to the next level.
Yes. So if somebody calls you and they say, I need a parenting coach. What's the process? I'm just curious, what does that look like?
On my website, I do have a training that is about 30 minutes, and it explains my philosophy and basically the whole scope of what I teach. Then I have a few options, and what I do is I talk to a parent. I talk to them at length, at least 45 minutes, to understand what they're dealing with, what their goals are, and if they're interested in doing it at this time, right? Because sometimes parents aren't quite ready. Then they have a choice. I basically have a 16-week program or an 8-week program, and I will make the best recommendation for each family depending on their needs and where they are. And I also do some individual consultations, but I really recommend the ongoing program because, even individual consultations, there's always follow-up that's needed. I like the opportunity to have a place to go twice per week for 16 weeks. It sounds like a lot, but honestly, by the time parents get to the 10th week, they're like, I'm not ready to graduate.
Right. Can I stay here forever? Well, I think that's similar to, I make the recommendation always for parents if they're, to have someone come with them to the meetings. And I know you don't do that, but non-lawyer advocates. And somebody actually said that to me once. They're like, who's your advocate? And I was like, why would I need an advocate? She's like, you have 4 kids with IEPs. And it is funny because I did have a lawyer for a while for when we saw a couple of my children, but they were like, oh my God, I shift, I can't be the lawyer in that situation. And so, just having other eyes there, somebody to help you listen and pay attention to what the priorities are and help keep you on track. I always recommend that. And that could be something that you need to help you keep it together so that you can focus on home if you have that other brain with you. So I think also as it applies to parent coaching, if that's something that you really benefit from, it doesn't have to be for a set period of time, right? It can go for longer and you can continue it, or on some component, those group components that you were talking about. This might be, you're never going to learn in 8 or 16 weeks every single thing you need to know to parent for the rest of your life, right? So it might be what works for you is an ongoing piece.
Right. Yes. And I have parents who have been with me for years and years. I also do like a monthly training for my graduates. So I invite them back. So once a month, they can come back. I do a training.
Oh, that's great.
A Q&A session so they can ask some, things of just, to maintain the connection, to know that there is a place to go. I also have a Facebook group that, you can ask questions in there and I answer.
Great. I'm going to have all that information in my show notes. So if anybody is on the run and not near a pen and paper or their computer or their phone, just go back to the show notes and I will have all the ways that you can reach out to Andrea and check out her website and all of that. Is there anything we've missed? I feel like we've covered a lot. And I think each component that we talked about, we could probably talk about all day. But I feel like we've covered mostly the basics.
Yeah. I think we have. I think, that support element is really important.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I didn't get the chance to mention is, there's a lot of research out there showing that obviously our children's behavior leads to parenting stress. We know that piece.
Mm-hmm.
But then parenting stress can undermine the efficacy of the therapies, right?
Yeah.
And when we undermine the therapies, it leads to more behaviors, which leads to more parenting stress. So this parenting stress cycle. What's important for people to hear in that is it's not blame. It's not like your stress is causing behavior. It's not at all that. It's that you are important too. You're an important ingredient in this dynamic. And if you need support, I hope that that you get the support that you need, because you are such an important part. And if you're not willing, so many of the parents I talk to, they're so selfless and they're so hardworking and giving, but so they don't want to devote to themselves, but to understand that you are such a key component in the whole process. So if you're not willing to do it for yourself, do it give support to yourself for your child.
I say that to my clients all the time when they're going through a rough component, and I say, don't forget to take care of yourself. It's overused and old, but that the image of the oxygen mask coming down in the airplane, right? Mm-hmm. You can't help someone else if you don't have it yourself. So, right. Take care of yourself so that you can be the best parent to your child that you need.
Right. And that also, that's something that I help parents with as well, because sometimes you say, take care of yourself. And, the immediate reaction is an eye roll. I mean, I remember being there.
Right.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, right.
In all my free time.
Right, exactly. But even something like, I have a mom who recently was like, I'm going to devote 10 minutes a day to yoga, just 10 minutes. Right. So we help let's set achievable goals. Before we get off of every call, we talk about what's your action plan. Right. So this isn't about learning. This is about more understanding. It is partly, but what am I going to do with that new understanding? And I really help make sure that parents take action on what they're learning.
Yes, that's so important. And the only other thing I wanted to add about community too was a lot of schools have a SEPTA, a Special Education Parent Teacher Association. And if they don't, you can find the SEPTA in your state and start one. But that's another place where you can find peers. If your school has an evening of explaining your rights to special education parents, then go to it. Even if you know your rights, go to it. Go see who's there. Go see who you can connect with, because anything like that, I know attorneys and advocates host, and therapists and parent coaches, they host things like that all the time, sometimes at the library or at the school. And go to them, even if you don't think you need the skill, because you're going to meet people who might be your peers and might be able to help you in other ways.
Yes, an excellent point. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. This was so informative. And it didn't even occur to me, parent coaching, until, I came across you. And I think that this is just such a needed component. I feel like parents of typically developing kids could use this. As somebody who had 5 teenagers at one point, I could have used a parent coach. So thank you so much for sharing your information, Andrea. And I will have all of your contact information and your website and everything in my show notes. So anyone who wants to come back and look at that, please do. And thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Please don't forget to follow this podcast so you don't miss any new episodes, and leave a review when you have a chance. If there's anything you want to hear about or comment on, please go to my Facebook page, Special Ed on Special Ed, and find me there. I'll see you next time here on Special Ed on Special Ed. Have a fabulous day. The views expressed in this episode are those of the speakers at the time of the recording and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company, or even that individual today.